Some apologies. If you don't say them today, tomorrow, they might turn into regrets you'll carry for a lifetime. The room was dim lit only by the weak glow of a desk lamp casting faint streaks of yellow light. The glow was so fragile that everything else seemed swallowed by the dark. The blotched gray walls, the creaking wooden chair, the dusty drawer, and the old curtain that fluttered with each whisper of wind slipping through the cracks of the door. On the desk lay a blank sheet of paper, motionless, as if waiting beside a pen with its cap cracked, the nib stained with dark blue ink. A man sat silently at the desk, his hands clasped together, trembling. Sweat beaded at his temple, though the room was cold. His eyes were fixed on the blank page, yet he couldn't write a single word. His breath came in short, uneven bursts, as if his chest carried a heart pounding out of rhythm, caught between the urge to confess and the fear of what would follow. He lifted the pen. The tip scraped against the page with a dry hiss. An insignificant sound, yet in the silence of that room it struck like a hammer blow in his mind. The first word appeared, Mom. He froze. The letter M wasn't even complete before the ink bled outward, a dark stain spreading across the page. His eyes burned red, his glasses fogged with moisture. Closing his eyes, he drew in a long breath, fighting the flood of emotions rising inside him. But memories crashed through like a storm. He could no longer hold back the image of his frail mother, wrapped in her old sweater, standing at the porch every evening, her eyes searching the endless road. From the street outside came muffled sounds, the faint blare of a horn. Hurried footsteps, the soft patter of rain on a tin roof. They only deepened the silence, pressing down on him. In his mind, her voice echoed once more. Son, I'm fine. When you come home, I'll cook your favorite braised fish. Simple words without reproach. And yet he, the son chasing after his career, had let time slip by without a single reply. His fingers tightened around the pen. A drop of sweat fell, staining the edge of the paper, leaving a blurry ring. He knew then this letter wasn't a choice. It was the only thing left he could do before it was too late. In the stillness, the clock ticked each second like a knife, carving deeper into his regret. He bit down on his lip until it left a mark. A single tear fell, landing right on the word Mom, the beginning of it all. He wrote again, his hand shaking, I'm sorry. The letters wavered, clumsy like a child's handwriting. Yet each stroke pierced the heart because these were the words he had buried for too long. The scratch of the pen filled the room, broken by moments of silence where his face twisted with guilt. He looked up, staring into the darkness ahead. The gray wall became a screen replaying his childhood. His mother's hand gripping his as she led him over gravel roads. Her bent figure patching clothes under a kerosene lamp. Her silhouette waiting quietly on the porch each dusk. Then came the memories of now missed calls left unanswered, short messages never returned. The room seemed to fall silent save for the pounding of his heart. He knew no excuse could erase the truth. One truth remained: he had left his frail, aging mother alone when she needed him most. The lamp flickered its glow, trembling as if ready to die, washing his face in pale light. Yet in his tear-stained eyes, another spark flickered determination. He bent down again, writing line after line, as though if he stopped, he would never find the strength to begin again. The words were not poetic, just short, uneven sentences soaked with remorse. I was wrong to stay silent. I forgot you were still waiting. I was selfish, thinking only of myself. But Mom, let me say it once, even if it's too late. A voiceover, deep and somber, seems to guide the viewer. Some letters are not written to be sent, but to save a lost soul. Some apologies are not about being forgiven, but about admitting we loved, we owed, and we regretted beyond measure. The camera drifts from the desk to the window. Outside, the sky is heavy and gray raindrops falling gently. The city lights glow faintly in the distance, blurred and dreamlike. In the shadows, the sun keeps writing, pouring every ounce of his heart into each line. Will this apology ever reach a heart that has waited for far too long? Morning in the city began with the sharp metallic slice of an alarm cutting through the air. The phone buzzed violently on the wooden desk, sliding slightly over the thin layer of dust that had gathered from days of neglect. The man jolted awake, not from being late, but from the hollow sense that something was missing, as if a door had opened in a dream, only to slam shut in his face. He reached out to silence the alarm. The screen flashed, reflecting his tired, sunken eyes. 5:32 a.m. Piahi. His apartment was a square box, pale gray walls, low ceiling, a single window barred with aluminum grills. Beyond it lay the light well of the building, where the footsteps of neighbors echoed downward like hollow drumbeats. The dawn wind slipped in through a crack, carrying the damp smell of cement and rusted iron. The thin curtain scraped against the window ledge with a dry rasp. The only warmth in that space came from a wool coat his mother had mailed him 2 winters ago, draped across the back of a chair. Its fabric was frayed at the shoulder, the scent of wool fading but still faintly laced with the smoky herbal trace of soap berries she used to boil. He switched on the kitchen light. The fluorescent tube flickered twice before humming to life its pale greenish glow, exposing streaks of dried water on the sink. He tore open a packet of instant coffee, poured boiling water into a chipped cup. Steam rose in thin ribbons, filling the air with its bitter heat. The first sip slid down his throat like a tiny blade sharp enough to wake him, yet leaving a burn in his chest. His schedule lit up in his mind like a flashing board. 7:30 internal meeting. 9th project update with partners. 12:15 unanswered emails. 3:00 demo review. 7:00 final report. Another day on the rails, precise and merciless, with no room for softer questions. He checked his phone. The private inbox was filled with ads. Messenger silent. The missed calls list sat at the bottom, buried deep. Only when he scrolled did it appear Mom. 2 missed calls. The date. More than a month ago. His thumb hovered over it, then pulled back as if burned. I'll call at lunch, he promised himself. But he already knew lunch would be swallowed by a dragged-out meeting, an urgent email, a sudden deadline, just like always. Outside, the city woke in its usual rush, the screech of bus brakes, the chorus of motorbike horns like a flock of startled birds. Someone downstairs turned on the radio, a dance track blasting awkwardly into the morning. He locked his door and stepped into the hallway. The stale smell of last night's cooking lingered, fried oil, fish sauce, onions. The elevator rumbled as it descended its warped mirror, throwing back his reflection in a gray shirt, black tie, stubble creeping across his chin. When the doors slid open at the ground floor, the artificial chill of air conditioning rushed his face, the synthetic scent of deodorizer smothering the odor of life itself. Smothering, too, the faint memory of soap berries his mother once infused into the fabric of his coat. Morning in his mother's village began differently. Before the sun had risen, the roosters had already crowed 3 times. The kitchen was still dim-lit only by a thin blade of light slipping through the cracks in the wooden shutters. She bent low to light the fire, the acrid smoke of straw mixing with the damp smell of earth, with the faint trace of last night's sweat still clinging to the bedding. The kindling caught flames, crackled, licking at the pot of water. Steam rose and stung her eyes. On the wall above the cupboard, the old clock ticked patiently, the minute hand dragging forward with deliberate slowness. She reached for a cloth to tie back her hair, listening to the sparrows chirping wildly outside the porch. Yet her heart sagged at the memory of another sound she had not heard in far too long. Her son's blunt voice saying, "It's me." "Mom, did you have breakfast yet?" She set a pot of sticky rice porridge on the fire, sprinkled a pinch of salt, and dropped in a few slices of ginger. The aroma of rice filled the air. It carried her back to cold mornings long ago, when her little boy would curl into her arms begging for a steaming bowl of porridge to warm his belly before school. She stepped out to water the gourd vines on the trellis. The cold droplets ran into the cracks of her wrinkled hands, sharp, but also like a nudge reminding her she was still alive. She gazed down the long, empty road, the one that carried the muffled rumble of buses each evening from the distant highway. By now he must already be at work, she thought, and then gave a small nod to herself, as if the wind had whispered back an answer. In the bedroom, her old brick phone lay patiently on the altar. Her son had bought her a smartphone, saying it would be easier to video call, but her fingers were clumsy, her eyes too weak, and every tap seemed to land in the wrong place. The brick phone, though, pressed the right button, and his voice came through. But people around her had said, "They're busy these days. It's inconvenient to call." So she stopped. The phone remained there beneath the framed photo of mother and son taken on his college entrance day, beside the certificate now yellowed by incense smoke. She lit a fresh stick of incense. The smoke curled upward, soft as a silken thread rising toward the ceiling before dissolving into the air. The coffee at the office had a different smell. Strong, direct, no frills. He took a sip and swiveled his chair toward the glass window. At 7:15 a.m., the city gleamed, silver-white skyscrapers jutting upward like sails straining in the wind. The glass reflected a river of traffic below, streaks of red brake lights flashing in broken lines. Somewhere beyond the pane, the faint whistle of the metro cut through small, almost like a toy train's horn. "Slide 6 needs to be rearranged. Put the chart before the analysis." A colleague said, urgency in his tone. He nodded and opened his laptop. The cursor blinked endlessly like an impatient eye demanding action. Numbers, charts, color schemes. The conference room was chilled to the bone, the polished wood table cool against his hands. People talked of market share strategy, growth scenarios. He spoke of risks, of contingency plans. Markers squeaked against the whiteboard, pens clicked, pages flipped with a sharp flutter. In the corner, a snake plant sat motionless, its glossy leaves so stiff they seemed artificial. Amid all the rehearsed motions, a sound slipped through like a crack in the script. A colleague on the phone, his voice casual, almost tender. "Mom, I'll stop by after this meeting." Just a handful of words, light as breath. Yet they pierced him through the starch of his shirt, through the heavy layer of cologne, straight into his chest like a cold needle. The feeling flared and vanished as quickly as the sudden halt of the photocopier's drone. He turned back to the screen, steadying himself. "I'll call this afternoon." The voice in his head was calm, familiar, merciless in its routine. In the countryside, noon arrived more slowly. The sun seemed to peel apart every sound cicadas in the old guava tree, poured honeyed cries onto the tiled roof. Her knife struck the cutting board with a steady clack. As she chopped vegetables, and a dog's bark echoed from 3 houses away. She carried a reheated bowl of rice porridge to the table, dipped into sesame salt, chewing slowly. The wooden table was etched with scratches from the years each groove, like a narrow road leading off into its own memory. She sat angled toward the doorway, sunlight slanting in dust, dancing in the beam, beautiful and at the same time piercing. On the chair across from her still hung her son's shirt from his last visit, kept there like a ritual. Its fabric had absorbed the scent of wood and sunlight, yet sometimes she swore she could still catch the faint trace of his city shampoo, so strangely clean. She opened the wooden box of letters. Inside, the old pages were stacked neatly bound with a faded red ribbon. His clumsy handwriting for middle school, words that to her were sacred as scripture. She had read them so often she could recite them by heart. One letter was left unfinished, written during his first year of work in the city. "Don't worry about me, Mom. Work is busy, but I'm still eating well." And then it stopped. Her fingertips brushed the edge of the paper, and for a moment she shivered as if touching a living pulse. She glanced at the clock. "He must be having lunch now," she whispered, waiting for the phone to ring. Outside, the sunlight moved like a hurried guest, stepping briefly into the courtyard before slipping down the lane. A street vendor's cry floated in as a bicycle rattled past black bean sweet soup, cool and refreshing. She lowered her bowl and listened, her old heart sitting up a little straighter as if in hope. In the city, lunch was a rushed takeout box, fried rice with egg, a few slices of cucumber, a packet of soy sauce. The stale tang of old cooking oil clung to it, impossible to hide. He ate quickly, eyes still fixed on the screen. His inbox, 27 new emails. Slack blinked red like watchful eyes. His phone buzzed against the desk, bank notifications, promo alerts, meeting reminders. And then, buried in the flood, a tiny notification appeared and vanished. Facebook memories, a photo of you with Mom 8 years ago. He didn't know why, but his finger, normally fluent in every keyboard shortcut, suddenly slowed, clumsy, hesitant. He opened the photo, a late golden afternoon, himself sitting on the front steps, his mother standing behind him, her hand resting on his shoulder. Her face was smiling, deep lines at the corners of her eyes, radiating a rare warmth. The photo trembled slightly because his hand was trembling. In that moment, the office noise blurred into a distant hum. What he heard most clearly was the clink of his spoon against the plastic container, the sound of his own swallow. His throat tightened. A strand of hair fell across his forehead. He brushed it away quickly. It felt as though he had just passed through a narrow door inside himself, where the scent of soap berries and the cry of summer cicadas collided. "I'll call this afternoon," he repeated, but now the words sounded less like routine and more like a promise he no longer dared to break. Afternoons in the countryside leaned long. The sunlight crawled up from the base of the wall to the eaves before spilling down across the yard, strewn with fallen mango leaves. She hung out a few hand towels, pressing her palms to each fold, listening to the crisp rustle of fabric. A breeze drifted in, carrying the scent of young rice from the fields at the edge of the village, mixed with the earthy tang of sun-dried mud. Children returned from school, their laughter scattering in bursts. She sat on a small bamboo chair, fingers rolling the beads of her rosary lips, moving silently. On the little table near the door sat a plate holding 2 green custard apples she had set aside. For when he comes home, she always told herself, as though it were a prayer. Suddenly, the old brick phone rattled. Its ring was sharp metallic, like something dropped on the floor. She startled, her hands trembling, her heart pounding as if it might leap from her chest. On the tiny screen appeared the words, "Unknown number." She pressed the button, lifted it to her ear. A neighbor's voice asked to borrow a rake. She laughed, said, "Of course," and only when the call ended did she realize she was breathing hard, as though she had just run. Her hand, still warm from holding the phone, left a faint imprint on her skin. She set the phone down, smoothed the towel in front of her, and pressed her lips together. "It's nothing," she whispered to herself, like comforting a child who had just missed out on a gift. Afternoon in the city rushed by. The sun hid behind slabs of concrete and glass, leaving only a thin streak of fire across the horizon. From the 22nd floor, the world looked like a shattered chessboard. He left the final meeting of the day, his head heavy, stuffed with cotton, his neck stiff, his shoulders drained. The elevator was crowded, perfume mingling with the crisp scent of new suits, and a faint mustiness from a raincoat slung over someone's backpack. When he stepped onto the sidewalk, the roar of traffic surged like a wave. Crossing the street, a motorbike swerved close. The rider shouted. He gave a weary smile, his throat so dry the sound of his laugh scraped like paper. At the diner beneath the tower, a bowl of hot soup was set before him. Dill, lime, and fish sauce rose in fragrant steam. He took a sip, and something in it pulled him backward toward another wooden table. Another fire. Another pair of hands placing a bowl down. Hands marked with brown sunspots from years of light and water. Without thinking, he set down his spoon and reached for his phone. The screen lit up. His thumb scrolled to Mom. He inhaled deeply. The street noise seemed to fade as if someone had turned down the city's volume. His finger touched the name, then stopped. A child darted past, bumping his arm. The spoon clattered against the floor. "Sorry, mister," the boy said. He nodded, forced to smile. The laugh that slipped out cracked hard like stones tumbling on concrete. "I'll call when I get home," he told himself. This time the words didn't sound like a command. They sounded like a plea. Evening in the countryside descended slowly like a blanket drawn over the village. Some houses flicked on fluorescent tubes, casting a pale light that washed the color from faces. But his mother lit a round yellow bulb, warm and soft, turning even the drifting dust into golden flecks of honey. She carried the dinner tray to the table, a bowl of sweet leaf soup, a plate of fried fish, a small dish of pickled eggplant. A meal for one had its own sounds, the clink of bowls on the table, the absent tap of a spoon against porcelain, the creak of a bamboo chair in rhythm with her breath. She lifted a piece of fish, dipped it in chili fish sauce, then set it back down. "Save it for him." The words slipped out aloud so softly they startled even her. She smiled, her eyes shimmering. "Save it for him," she repeated inwardly, this time like a prayer. After eating, she washed the dishes. Her hands rinsed and dried. The faint scent of cheap soap drifted up, gentle and clean. Outside, motorbikes grew fewer. The blare of radios vanished, leaving only the chirr of insects. She lit incense at the family altar, pressed her forehead against the wooden edge, and whispered, "Keep him safe. Help him remember the way home." The smoke curled around the framed photo of mother and son, a single thread of silk tugging at her heart. She turned, her eyes falling on the old brick phone. Silent. She pulled out a chair and sat, hands folded, thumb stroking her forefinger, a habit born of waiting. Night in the city was never truly night. It only changed color. The streets put on their coat of lights, signs blinked in neon, the backdrop a blur of car horns tangled with chaotic pop music. He returned to his apartment and switched on the lamp. The smell of his own room met him. Old paper, an unwashed jacket, a faint trace of damp. He pulled off his tie, leaving it sprawled on the chair like a tired snake. He turned on the tap, splashed water on his face longer than usual. The cold stung his eyes, numbed the bridge of his nose, and dragged loose the buried threads of memory his mother crouched sorting vegetables. Silver strands falling across her brown blouse, her rough fingers brushing his hair, her low hum soft and steady as she sang to ripening bananas. He dried his face and stared into the mirror. It reflected not only a man bracing his shoulders, but also the question that had hovered all day. Am I really heading in the right direction? Somewhere he heard himself answer with the instinct the city had drilled into him. Yes, because this is the path upward. Yet another voice slid out from the thin shadow behind his reflection. Upward to where, if you've forgotten how to bend back home. He sat at his desk, switched on the yellow lamp with its fabric shade edges scorched. Its glow was warm and closed like a small umbrella raised against rain. On the desk, amidst piles of paper, his eyes fell on one thing, the scarf his mother had knitted. The green yarn was frayed, a clumsy knot tied at its center. She had said, "My hand slipped," but he knew it was the moment her vision blurred, her body weary. He lifted the scarf. A faint scent rose, not of the city, but of somewhere else, the smoky sweetness of soap berries, the dry warmth of sunlit courtyards, the ash of a kitchen fire. His hand grew warmer. The phone lay face down. Slowly he turned it over. The screen flared, catching the wet glimmer in his eyes. The contacts page was already open, highlighting one name, Mom. Through the wall came the dull rumble of a neighbor's washing machine beating an odd rhythm. He drew a deep breath, chest tightening as though bound with rope. "Call," he whispered, ordering his finger. The doorbell rang. A delivery man with a package, the books he'd forgotten he ordered. He signed, stepped back inside. Silence fell again. He tore open the parcel inside a volume bound in brown paper, its cover a photograph of rice fields. His fingers traced the embossed stalks of grain. They scratched his skin lightly like a touch. He smiled faintly, almost painfully, and set the book down. The phone still glowed. The word Mom burned like a strip of green light against the night. The air in the room thickened. The scent of yarn paper plaster walls all fused into a heavy stillness. And within that stillness, a single narrow slit of light remained the thought. If not now, then when? In the village at that very moment, his mother stood. Her shadow stretched long across the floor, trembling under the golden bulb. She walked to the altar, whispered an extra prayer. No one could tell if it was intuition or simply her habit of weaving hope into action. She turned back, sat down, and reached for the phone. She didn't press any buttons. She only rested her hand on it as though laying it gently on a tiny sleeping heart. In the city, he pressed. The first dial tone pierced his ears, scraping familiar yet strange. His heart raced. Sweat trickled down his spine. He closed his eyes as if shutting them would make the first words easier to release. Mom. He thought he'd say it the instant she picked up, but he never got the chance. The call went to voicemail. A flat, polite machine voice. The number you have dialed. The rest dissolved into static. He dropped the phone into his lap, burning hot in his hand. He didn't know that back in the village, his mother had missed the call, fumbling with the charger, or drowned out by a barking dog, or perhaps just because the late-night signal faltered. She looked down at the screen too late, saw only missed call, without a name. Her hands shook. Her lips murmured a quiet plea, begging that the missed call might come again. His room suddenly felt smaller, heavy, thick as water. His eyes stung. A need rose inside him, not like the urge to meet a deadline or fix a slide, but primal raw, the need to hear a voice. He sat straighter, opened his messaging app. He typed, "Did you eat dinner?" "Mom," then erased it. Typed, "I've been so busy." Erased. Typed, "I miss you." And stopped. The word miss glowed on the screen like a flame, small but enough to ignite the whole room. In the village, his mother lifted the phone to her ear, replaying an old voicemail he had once left, the only time he'd spoken for more than a minute. He had told her about mopping up rainwater after a storm flooded the office. His voice back then was younger, playful, sugarcoating exhaustion with humor. She laughed aloud when he said soaked like a drowned rat. Then she grew still, her gaze drifting to the door. Night had thickened. The air outside carried the smell of leaves, mud, and straw smoke, like a thin blanket draped across the village. In that silence, she could hear her own heartbeat, patient and kind like the ticking of the old clock on the wall. In the city, he set the phone down and looked out the window. The skyline sprawled beneath him like a massive circuit board, lights blinking along invisible wires. Each glowing square was an untold story. Somewhere a son was calling his mother. Somewhere a father was tucking in his child. Somewhere someone was saying, "I'll be home a little late tonight." His hand reached for the knitted scarf again. He realized he was trembling not from cold, but from something else. A shift, a fear, not of being busy, but of silence turning into habit. Of someday opening his phone and seeing Mom only framed on an altar. Of never again hearing the shrill ring of her brick phone. He picked up his pen. On the desk lay a blank sheet of paper. The ink had dried from the night before, but with a little pressure it flowed again. He didn't know why he wasn't calling back. Instead, he began to write. Maybe because words on paper traveled more smoothly, stumbled less, and were less likely to dissolve into tears. The first line surfaced on the page, slow and deliberate like a reed boat pushing out from the bank. "Mom, it's me." In the village at that same hour, his mother straightened suddenly, hand on her chest. She didn't know why, but she felt lighter, as if the night air had opened a small passage for the wind to slip through. She rose, switched off the brighter lights, leaving only a single lamp glowing in the corner, the one she always left on each evening to keep the house warm. Its glow stretched her shadow long, leaning across the opposite chair. His chair. The city and the village were hundreds of miles apart, yet tonight the distance was measured in breath. One slow, steady breath of a mother. One fast, trembling breath of a son growing calm. The scent of soap berries and the hum of air conditioning, the chorus of cicadas and the churn of a washing machine. The honey gold of a small bulb, and the green-blue glare of neon all coexisted in one unseen frame. A frame the audience could touch with ears, with skin, with memory. And in that frame, the first change quietly took root. He no longer told himself tomorrow. He had begun to write now. His hand paused at the edge of the page chest, warm and tight. Outside, a siren tore through the night, slicing the silence. He flinched, looked up. The sound faded into distance. The room sank again into deep stillness. He lowered the pen, wrote on this time without erasing. Short, awkward sentences, but so honest his hand grew warm. In the village, his mother smiled suddenly, though she didn't know why, smiled as though hearing a whisper from far, far away. Wait for me. Night fell on the city as if someone had that forced him to act. That night, the city sank into a strange kind of silence. No car horns, no hurried footsteps in the hallway, only the faint whistle of wind slipping through cracks in the glass and the slow tick of the clock, each notch, a steady reminder that time never stops. In the small room, the weak yellow desk lamp cast a circle of light no wider than a yard, just enough to reveal the scratched wooden table, the pen lying at an angle, and the blank sheet of paper resting still like a mirror that had never reflected anything. Beyond that circle, the darkness thickened, wrapping the room like a lonely island in the middle of the night sea. The man sat there, his head cradled in his hands, hair disheveled, eyes bloodshot. His throat was raw, breath ragged, as if every inhale carried with it a stone pressing against his chest. The phone lay beside him, screen dark, yet with one touch it would reveal the familiar contact, Mom. He stared at it, his trembling hand inching closer. In his mind he saw it, his mother answering, her voice raspy from coughing, asking the familiar question, "Son, how have you been?" He imagined himself breaking down, unable to form a single word. He feared that his trembling voice would only worry her more, widening the distance he already dreaded. His hand recoiled. He felt like a coward. Why was he afraid of her voice, the very voice he had longed for all his childhood? Why was it so easy to speak before 100 people in a meeting, yet impossible to steady himself before a single call? His eyes shifted to the paper. Pure white, empty, a vast space. Inside him was the same emptiness, a place meant to be filled with questions of care, with words of love, but which he had let the years scatter like wind-blown dust. He drew a long breath, picked up the pen. The tip scraped against the paper with a dry hiss. The first line appeared slowly. "Mom." His hand shook. Each word felt unbearably heavy. Tears welled, blurring the ink. He wiped them away, but more spilled over. Inside his head, one tormenting question echoed. Will she still have the strength to read these words? Am I already too late? He set the pen down and reached for his phone once more. Call her. Call her now. The voice inside screamed. He opened his contacts, his thumb hovering over the word Mom. He pressed halfway, then backed out. Fear tightened around his throat. He was terrified there might be no one left to answer. Terrified of hearing nothing but that endless hollow dial tone. He broke down. His sobs tore through his chest, spilling out in ragged, trembling bursts. He buried his face in his hands, shoulders shaking with each gasp. The desk lamp flickered, and his shadow blurred on the wall, a figure lost directionless. For a long while he wept. Then, wiping his face, he made a decision. If he couldn't summon the courage to call, then he would write. Write everything. Leave nothing unsaid. The letter would speak for him. He lifted the pen again. The scratching of ink filled the silence. Each sentence cut into his heart like a blade, but each line also soothed like medicine. Mom, I'm sorry for the long days I left you alone. I'm sorry for the times you called and I stayed silent. I'm sorry for thinking that success here was more important than the meals you cooked. I was wrong. Tears dripped onto the page, spreading into blurred circles. He didn't stop. The more he cried, the faster his hand moved. Words dammed up for years burst forth like a river finally breaking free. He wrote of memories, the time she carried him across a flood-swollen stream, the nights she stayed awake knitting him a sweater, the silence she endured when he hurled cruel words at her. Each moment returned, layered into every crooked line of ink. He wrote of the present, the emptiness amid the crowded city, the loneliness in boardrooms full of people, the invisible distance growing longer each day between him and his mother. He wrote of fear of one day opening his phone and finding her name gone, fear of coming home only to be met by an altar shrouded in smoke. Each word was a drop of blood, each line a scar. Yet in that pain flickered a small light courage. At last, after pages upon pages, he set the pen down. His hand was numb, his eyes swollen, but his heartbeat had slowed steadier now. On the desk lay a thick stack of paper edges smudged with tears, the handwriting shaky but honest to its core. He leaned back in his chair, eyes turned upward. One last tear slid down his cheek, but this time it was not born of fear. It was release. In the dark, the clock still ticked. But now its rhythm was no longer a cruel countdown. It was breath. It was witness to the choice he had finally made, pouring his whole heart into it. The letter remained there, unsent. Yet it was already the first step. The step that broke through the wall of silence. The step that brought him closer to his mother than he had been in years. That afternoon, the sun slid across the rooftop and sank behind the bamboo grove, leaving behind a thin golden ribbon tied around the village path. The dirt road outside his mother's gate was cracked and dry wheel ruts pressed deep into the earth. Blades of crabgrass lifted their tiny tongues, trembling in the wind. The cicada's chorus slowed, retreating from the midday wall of sound, giving way to the clucking of chickens in the coop, and the long, drawn-out cry of a street vendor pushing his cart past fresh rice rolls, Hot. Here. She was pulling weeds along the fence when the postman's bicycle bell rang twice clear and delicate like glass chiming. He stopped at the gate, set down his bike, and reached into a worn canvas bag, pulling out an ivory-colored envelope, a blue swallow printed on the corner of the stamp. "You've got a letter," he said, his breath carrying the dust and sunlight of the road. Her hand froze, dirt clinging between her fingers. "From who?" The question escaped without a target. The postman smiled, holding the envelope out. "From your son." Time seemed to collapse into a single thread in her eyes. She reached out, earth falling from her palm in a fine mist onto the yard. The envelope carried the faint scent of fresh paper mingled with the writer's hands, a smell she couldn't quite name. Not the cheap soap she used, not the smoke of the kitchen fire. It was the smell of the city caught in the fibers of the page, subtle yet unmistakable. The glue at the corner was still stiff, the seam pressed neat and straight. Her name appeared in familiar handwriting she had not seen in years. Letters leaning slightly to the right. Every accent mark placed carefully as if the writer feared hurting the paper. "Could you sign here for me?" the postman asked, handing over his book. She scribbled her name, the pen dragging into a heavy blot of ink from her trembling hand. When he left, the sound of his bell faded into the distance, swallowed by the rustle of bamboo in the wind. Still she stood there, the envelope resting in her palm, its surface crisscrossed with the cracks of a long summer. She pressed it against her cheek, the coolness of the paper seeping into her skin. And then she exhaled a breath, drawn deep, released even deeper. She stepped inside, pulling the gate closed behind her. The wooden latch struck with a round, solid clack. In the main room, the light had softened. Dust motes floated in the slanted sunbeams, each one shimmering like a tiny lantern. She placed the envelope on the old wooden table right beneath the photo of her and her son taken years ago on the porch. On the table sat a chipped ceramic vase with a few pale purple wildflowers, and beside it the yellow-shaded lamp, whose switch bore a dimple from years of pressing. She lowered herself into the chair, her palm stroking the envelope one more time like she used to smooth her son's back when he was a child. Then she took a thin blade and slid it open. The sound's rich scritch was faint but sharp, like the crack of ice breaking on a thin river. She pulled the letter free. The paper was thick, soft, faintly textured. The ink carried a delicate smell. Her heart so used to its steady rhythm tick. Talk. Tick. Talk. Suddenly stumbled, then surged. She drew in a breath, laid the letter flat on the table, and leaned so that the afternoon light fell directly on the page. Her shadow stretched long across the table, reaching toward the wall where a red calendar hung, printed with the image of a rice field. The first line, "Mom, it's me." Her blood seemed to rush inward, then burst outward in tiny streams, coursing through every vein. She touched the word "Mom" with her fingertip hand, trembling as though she could touch his voice through the page. The handwriting, though tilted, was unmistakable. The loops arched a little too high, the periods tiny like raindrops. She smiled, her eyes wet. Softly, she whispered to herself, "Yes, it's me." At that same hour, hundreds of miles away, her son stood at the window of his apartment, gazing down at the slope of the overpass. The city evening painted streaks of orange across the glass towers, exhaust smoke blending into a hazy veil. He had mailed the letter 2 days earlier, timing it carefully, so it would arrive in the late afternoon when she usually sat by the porch. Since then, he had lived inside a transparent box, able to see the world, hear its noise, but separated by the thick air of waiting. His phone was set to the loudest ringtone, every buzz jolting him like a shock. He unfolded the knitted scarf she had made and laid it across his lap, fingers stroking the clumsy knot in the middle, the knot she once explained as "my hand slipped." His fingertips warmed not from heat, but from memory. And in the roar of the city, he thought he caught something faint, the rustle of paper being opened. His chest tightened, his heart skipping a beat, then pounding harder. She read the next line. "I'm sorry for the days I stayed silent." The words "I'm sorry" were written slower than the rest, the ink pressed darker, as if the pen had paused there for a long time before moving on. She tilted her head, tracing each tiny motion of the strokes, as though she could see her son's trembling hand as he wrote. And memory pulled her back to a night long ago, the flicker of an oil lamp, her hands mending the shirt he had torn, climbing a tree, the needle pricking her finger and leaving a bright bead of blood, her boy asleep beside her, clutching her arm, even in his dreams. She hadn't scolded him the next morning when he lied, "I don't know." She had only smiled, the scent of medicated oil on her hands seeping into the air, making breakfast taste warmer. Now the words "I'm sorry" lay before her like a leaf falling onto still water ripples, spreading slow and steady. Her eyelids fluttered. A tear slid over her lashes, dropped onto the back of her hand, resting on the page, and sank into her skin, like the last rain of the season. She whispered softly, "Son." She read on. "I'm afraid to call because I'm afraid I'll cry first." A faint smile curved on her lips, a smile both tender and sad. "So what if you cry?" she murmured, her voice hoarse. "Crying is still speaking." From the porch, the wind carried in the smell of straw and pumpkin blossoms. A yellow butterfly landed briefly on the doorframe, then drifted away. In that golden light, the paper became a small field, and the words were bowed stalks of ripe grain. In the city, he pressed his hand against his chest. His heartbeat fell into rhythm with the ticking clock back home. He closed his eyes and saw her squinting as she read, tilting the letter so the light wouldn't glare. He could almost hear the rustle of paper. He could almost smell the faint trace of soap berries mingling with ink. On his tongue, a sudden saltiness spread. Was it a drop of sweat from his mother's brow or one of his own unshed tears? She turned to the second page. The sheets brushed together with a sound as thin as a breath. At the top was a blurred circle where a tear had fallen, and then the wavering line. "Mom, I once thought the city was everything. I thought love could wait, that when I was settled, I'd return. I was wrong." She paused at the words "could wait." Her lips moved. So love that could be delayed had never truly been love at all, only hesitation unnamed. She thought of the countless moons she had told herself, "Tomorrow he'll call. He must be busy." And then sat at the porch listening to buses rumble down the faraway highway, half believing she heard her son's footsteps outside the gate, that tomorrow had stretched into years. The wind outside rose, lifting one edge of the curtain. The golden light thinned, and dusk spilled across the wall in darker strokes. She didn't switch on the lamp. She wanted to finish reading in this fading light, like finishing a dream before it dissolved. I missed the kitchen. The clang of the ladle against the pot, the bowl of vegetable soup. Here I eat many strange dishes, but none taste like home. At that, she set the letter down, smiling through tears. Her hand reached forward as if she could place a steaming bowl before herself in memory. She heard the water boiling from years past, the hiss of ginger dropped in the fresh green aroma of sweet leaf rising. That poor man's meal in her son's memory had never been poor. "I'm afraid one day I'll open my phone and your name won't appear anymore." Her chest tightened. The words shone like a flashlight into a corner she had hidden away. Her own fear mirrored his, only reversed. She too feared the day she might call and no one would pick up. Feared the day his short messages, "I'm busy," would vanish entirely, replaced with silence. She laid her palm over the sentence, holding it as she would hold his hand crossing a crowded street. In his apartment, he flung the window wide. Night had already fallen, but the heat still clung to the pavement, rising in waves that smelled of soft asphalt and hot dust. From a balcony across the street, someone watered plants, the droplets pattering against porcelain pots. The sound pulled him back to mornings when his mother watered the gourd vines, the splash of water as thin and delicate as a thread. He leaned his forehead against the frame skin pressed to the cold aluminum. And for a fleeting moment, he wasn't on the 22nd floor anymore. He was standing at the kitchen door of his old home, watching a wisp of smoke curl out, drawing a soft line along the porch. His mother kept reading. The next line flowed together like an unbroken voice. "I've spoken so confidently in front of so many people, yet I couldn't say one simple thing to you. I miss you. I'm sorry." The words "miss" and "sorry" struck like two tones on a bronze bell. The first carried sorrow, the second love, and the last forgiveness for him and for her. Because forgiveness that travels only one way will always fracture the story. But when both forgive themselves, the story becomes whole again. She leaned back against the bamboo chair so lightly that its creak was thin as an insect's song, gentle like an unnamed note in the night. She turned her head toward the old flip phone resting on the altar. It was silent. Yet strangely, she heard a ringing. Something inside her had finally been called by its true name. She placed her hand over her chest and warmth spread beneath her palm. She turned to page 3. At the top, only 4 words. "No more, no less, Mom. I'm coming home." The air in the room changed, as if a side door had been opened, letting the wind rush in. The curtain billowed softly, brushing her arm like a caress. She closed her eyes. A tear fell swiftly straight onto the word "home." The ink bled outward, blooming into a nameless flower. She pressed a finger to stop the next tear, but it was too late. It had already fallen, already marked its place. She held the letter against her chest, cradling it as if it were her 10-year-old boy who had just scraped his knee. Her breathing slowed, deepened. In the distance, the neighbor's dog barked a sharp volley, then fell quiet, as though even a watchman felt reassured. She rose and switched on the lamp. Its warm yellow glow bathed the pages, turning them into an autumn lake, where the words drifted like fallen leaves. She read again from the beginning to nearly the end until she reached the passage. The night I wrote this, I placed the scarf you knitted on my lap. My fingers kept finding the knot in the middle. It felt like I was touching the place where your hand once grew tired. I wish I had seen it sooner. She laughed through her sobs, an odd sound like rain hitting hot oil. Oh my, she whispered that knot wasn't from a slip. I fell asleep. Wiping her tears with the back of her hand, she caught the faint taste of salt. Then the laugh broke into a cough. The cough shook her thin frame forward hands, drumming a rhythm on the table, the rhythm of someone reminding herself to breathe, to stay steady. When it passed, she returned to the letter as though she were a swimmer who had just touched the shore, only to slip back into warm waters again. If I could go back, I'd never leave you waiting on the porch. But time only moves one way. So I write this letter for the now, so that now isn't too late. The word late clung like a hook, catching everything that might have slipped away. She nodded gently. For years, she had soothed herself at night. He must be busy forgiving her son halfway. Forgiving her own waiting halfway. Tonight, the scale tipped entirely. Enough. Enough to listen. Enough to understand. Enough to forgive. In the city, he sat on the floor back against the wall, knees drawn close. His fingertips touched the cool, varnished wood, the old scent of resin rising faintly. He imagined her hand resting on the word late, the way one might grasp the arm of someone about to stumble. In his mind appeared a dirt road, a porch, a bamboo chair creaking. He heard the scrape of a cat's paw against a wooden door, a sound that belonged only to home, never to high-rises. His throat tightened. His mouth tasted of salt. He whispered not into the phone, not to be sent, but only to the four walls around it. Mom. She closed the letter, then opened it again like someone lifting a curtain and letting it fall, only to lift it once more. From the drawer beneath the family altar, she drew out a small cloth bundle, the place where she kept her dearest things. A few old photographs, a scrap of baby cloth, a broken earring, and the fountain pen her late husband once used. She set the bundle beside her son's letter, gazing at them together, past and present, two objects sharing the same weight, the weight of love. She rose to make tea. The kettle hissed as boiling water met porcelain, releasing a thin white vapor. The scent of green tea rose bitter sharp, filling her nose. She poured into a small cup, blew gently and sipped. The warmth spread across her tongue, down her throat, seeping into her joints like a thin balm, for the old aches that clicked in the shifting weather. She returned to the table, set the teacup beside the letter, ready to read it again. But before she did, her hand reached for the phone. The old keypad was stiff, each button needing force. She pressed the familiar string of numbers and lifted it to her ear. Ring, ring. Each tone pierced her chest like a tiny nail. In his apartment, he jolted upright when the ringtone split the air. He leapt to his feet, the scarf tumbling to the floor. His hand trembled so badly he fumbled the button to silence the ring, tripped on the edge of the rug, bent to grab the phone, his palm brushing the cold floor. Still it rang. He inhaled sharply. Hello, Mom. At the sound of that last word, both fell silent for a beat, as if listening for their own souls within the other's voice. She pressed the phone tighter to her ear. Across the line, she could hear his breathing, one breath quick, one breath slow, until they found rhythm together. I read your letter. She spoke first, her voice raspy yet steady. Your writing still slants just like when you were small. A laugh broke from both throats, laughter tangled with tears. He whispered, Mom. And she answered, Yes, it's me. The silence that followed was not awkward. It was thick, warm, like a quilt laid across trembling shoulders. He inhaled deeply. I'm sorry. She hummed in reply, a soft, low sound like ginger candy dissolving slowly on the tongue. Forgiveness isn't for forgetting, son, she said. Forgiveness is for remembering rightly. He closed his eyes, nodding, though she could not see. I remember rightly now, Mom, he said, his voice breaking. I remember rightly now. She told him about the gourd vines stretching across the fence, about the cat who'd had 3 kittens, about the cicadas that came late this year, about the bamboo chair that creaked until she wedged a block of wood beneath it. Small things so small no one in the city would notice. He listened without interrupting, each word falling into him like raindrops onto parched soil. Tap, tap, tap. A minimalist symphony. Then her voice lowered. I've had a cough these past few days, but it's better now. Don't worry. He froze for half a breath, his fingers gripping the doorframe until his nails scraped white streaks into the paint. I'm coming home tomorrow, he said, his voice fractured yet firm. Tomorrow or the day after, she teased lightly with the mischief of the old catching the young in their promises. Tomorrow morning, he replied, leaving no room for hesitation. On the other end, she answered simply, Mom. Just one syllable, short, quiet. But behind it, a door swung wide open, and through it swept the wind of life itself. The wind of being awaited once more, in the truest sense. Read your letter aloud, she said. Read it for me. Wherever you see the ink blurred, that's where you cried. And wherever the words are smudged, that's where I cried. He laughed through tears. Mom, then the whole letter must be rain. No, she answered. Just enough rain to make the earth smell sweeter. He opened the photo of the letter on his phone and began to read. Each word spoken out loud carried a different weight, now heavier, warmer, vibrating in the air between them. Mom, it's me. I'm here. I'm sorry. I'll come home. I'll be waiting. Between those words stretched silences shaped like the curves of hills, spaces to rest, a hand to breathe, to feel the chest rise and fall slowly. In those pauses, he felt as though he could almost touch her hand, not through a screen, not through polite phrases, but through a thin thread stretched from the first mom to the final waiting. The phone grew warm in his hand, overtaking the cold from the aluminum window frame. On the other end, she shifted the phone to her other hand, her back straighter, her cough receding. Son, she said, when you come tomorrow, I'll make sweet leaf soup. It should taste the same as before. He smiled, wiping his tears with the cuff of his sleeve. If it tastes the same, that's enough, Mom. Yes, she replied softly. The same is enough. The call ended slowly, not with a hurried bye, but with a simple promise tomorrow morning. When the screen went dark, both gazed at their own reflections in the glass. A woman with silver hair, her eyes brighter than they had been that afternoon, and a man who looked younger than he had at noon, the burden of years finally set down. She turned back to the letter. With careful hands, she folded at each crease as neat as a winter blanket. She slipped it into the cloth bundle among the old photo and the fountain pen, then changed her mind. She took it out, placed it in a fresh envelope, and set it neatly on the family altar beneath the warm glow of the lamp. So it will stay warm, she whispered, as if speaking to the letter itself. Outside, night had fully arrived. The countryside air thickened, cool, damp, and fragrant. Insects took over where the cicadas left off, laying a heavy blanket of sound across the narrow lane. She stacked the chairs, dimmed the lamp, and went to her room. But she did not sleep at once. She lay on her side, a hand pressed to her chest, feeling each heartbeat. Each one was like a small wave striking the shore, gentle but sure. She closed her eyes, and in the dark, the image of her son holding the knitted scarf appeared again. She smiled the smile of someone who has just received back something once thought lost. In the city, he wrote the final lines on a fresh sheet of paper, not to send, but to keep the date, the time, and one single sentence, Mom, I'm coming home. He stuck it to the refrigerator door right in the center. Each time he passed by, he would read it, and each time the words etched deeper, like walking a newly opened path that grows clearer with every step. He packed his backpack with unusual care, one white shirt, a pair of khaki trousers, a toothbrush. The small gift he had bought long ago, but never sent, a silk scarf the color of sugarcane juice, once meaningless, now carrying weight. On top, he placed the knitted scarf his mother had made so that the first thing he touched when he opened the bag would be that faint scent of soap berries. His phone charged fully on the nightstand. He dimmed the lights, leaving just one small lamp glowing, his own version of the lamp his mother always left on to keep the house warm. Something he had only found the words for tonight. He lay down, closed his eyes. The city still roared, but the noise drifted outward like the tide receding from a rocky shore. In his mind, he reread every line he had written, every line he had spoken aloud to her. Each line was now a step toward home. And before the alarm clock could ring, he had already slipped into a gentle sleep, faintly scented with sweet leaf soup, the clang of a ladle against a pot, and his mother's voice. Come home, son. At dawn in the countryside, the rooster's crow carved the first streak of light across the doorway. She rose and lit the stove. The fire caught quickly, dry wood popping and snapping. She washed a bundle of fresh greens, the leaves clinging damply to her fingers, their green scent cooling her nose. When the water boiled, she dropped the leaves in. Steam rose, carrying with it a flavor impossible to name, the taste of home. In the city, he zipped his bag. The window pane was misted with dew. When he opened the door, a cool draft swept in, carrying birdsong from the nearby park, a sound he had rarely noticed before. His steps down to the elevator were lighter than any day prior, as though he had returned yesterday's invisible stones to the ground. The taxi pulled up. The door opened. He slid inside and spoke 2 words, train station. His voice no longer uncertain, but certain. But all these movements, the fire leaping in the stove, the leaves swirling in boiling water, the wheels turning on asphalt, were only the afterimage of what had already happened the night before the letter had been read. When the letter was read, it wasn't only eyes scanning, lips moving, hands trembling. When the letter was read, a room changed its scent, a heart changed its rhythm, a breath changed its course. And along the straight line between moss-covered tiles and a wall of city glass, a thread had been pulled taut, warm, unbreakable. That was the moment when the climax was no longer a sob but became a radiant silence, a place where sorrow, love, and forgiveness stood side by side without jostling, without pushing, each holding its space, and letting the light pass through. The mother laid her hand on the letter and whispered, "Thank you, son." The son placed his hand over his heart and whispered, "Thank you, Mom." Two voices carrying the same meaning and the same rhythm meeting in a place with no map, yet a place both already knew the way to. At dawn, the train station was already crowded. Announcements echoed in a steady, monotonous voice bouncing beneath the curved iron roof. The air was thick with the scent of rust grease and coffee mingling in the cool, damp morning. The young man stood in the concourse backpack strapped to his shoulders, fingers gripping the strap so tightly his knuckles turned white. His heart raced not with the frantic beat of work deadlines, but with the trembling rhythm of homecoming. The silver-blue train rolled slowly into the station's steel wheels, grinding against the tracks with a sharp screech followed by a gust of wind that swept through the platform like an orchestra, announcing departure. He stepped into the carriage, found a seat by the window, and exhaled deeply. The smell of old fabric on the seats, the warmth of sun baked into the glass, all of it smelled like memory. The train shuddered, then began to move. Through the window, the city receded, skyscrapers fading into blurred blocks before giving way to green fields, to red-tiled roofs nestled among banana groves. With every mile, another layer of dust was scrubbed from his heart. He leaned his forehead against the glass eyes fixed on the horizon, whispering, "I'm coming home, Mom." In the village, morning also began with the crow of roosters and the smoke of wood fires. She rose earlier than usual. Her hands trembled with age as she lit the stove and set a pot of water on it, but her eyes gleamed with uncommon brightness. In the corner lay the bundle of sweet leaf greens she had picked from the garden yesterday. She rinsed the leaves, cold water sliding across her wrinkled fingers, leaving a sting that felt like life itself. She said nothing aloud, but in her chest she knew today her son would come home. The night before, after their call, she had lain on her side with her palm over her heart. The beats had steadied. A fragile belief was enough to raise her up the way even the faintest breeze can still stir an old tree's branches. She set bowls and chopsticks neatly on the table, polishing each porcelain cup. The morning light filtered through the window, catching the dust and silver threads. She glanced toward the narrow dirt lane leading to the highway, where passing trucks stirred clouds of powdery earth. Her eyes, dimmed by years, shone bright this morning, clear as fresh water. On the train, the young man unzipped his backpack and pulled out the photo of the letter. He read every line again, eyes blurring, a smile breaking through tears. His heart no longer pounded with fear, but with resolve. He knew he could never reclaim the years he had lost, but he could begin here in this moment on this train, carrying him back to the one who still waited at the gate. Outside, fields of rice rippled in waves of green stirred by the wind. Wooden bridges crossed narrow rivers, and the silhouettes of farmers bent low in the paddies. He watched, and it was as though he had stepped into childhood again, running through the fields. Laughter echoing, his mother calling from the edge. "Come home for dinner." That voice, once distant, now rang inside his chest. The rhythm of the train wheels against the rails, clack, 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 beat in time with the rhythm of the homeland. He closed his eyes and let the sound carry him backward through time. In the village, the mother sat on the bamboo chair by the porch. The old hand fan lay beside her, but she didn't need it. The breeze from the rice fields was enough. Her eyes stayed fixed on the lane, the same spot she had watched from every evening. But today was different. Today she wasn't waiting in despair, but in a clear, undeniable hope. Her hands rested on her lap thumb, tracing the edge of her forefinger, an old habit whenever she waited. Sparrows chirped in the gourd vines above, sunlight slipping through the leaves and scattering into playful patches on the ground. She smiled softly. In that smile there were tears. But not the bitter kind, these were sweet, gentle tears born of waiting that finally promised an answer. The train finally slowed. The brakes screeched, metal grinding on metal like a long sigh breaking free. He rose to his feet, shoulders heavy, yet his steps light. Out on the platform, sunlight blazed, voices shouted, vendors called out. He stepped down the stairs and inhaled deeply, the scent of soil dust and the country wind flooding into his chest. His eyes blurred, not from the glare but from emotion. The bus carried him down familiar roads. Every corner, every row of trees stirred an old memory. He pressed his face to the window, watching children kick a ball. An old woman selling food from her cart rooftop streaked with moss. His heart burned as though someone had lit a fire inside. The bus stopped at the entrance of the lane. He climbed down, backpack on his shoulders, walking step by step down the dirt road. Gravel crunched beneath his shoes. The wind carried the fragrance of young rice. At the far end of the lane, his mother stood small, frail, dressed in a faded brown blouse, her silver hair glinting in the sun. Her eyes, blurred by age, still found the shape she had known her whole life. "Mom!" His voice cracked as he called. The mother's body trembled as she stepped forward, arms stretching out just as she had, so many times before. The distance of decades collapsed into a few racing heartbeats. He dropped his backpack and ran. She wrapped her arms around him, holding on as if afraid letting go would make him vanish. Her warmth, the smell of sunshine and wood smoke clinging to her clothes, all of it crashed into him, and he sobbed like a child. "I'm sorry, Mom," he whispered, tears soaking into her shoulder. She stroked his back, her voice rough but steady. "I was never angry, son. I was only waiting. A little too long." That single sentence, light as a breeze, swept away the years of guilt. In that moment, he understood forgiveness wasn't in words. It lived in her eyes, in her arms, in her endless patient waiting. That evening, the little house glowed with life. On the table, a bowl of green sweet leaf soup, a plate of crispy fried fish, a small dish of pickled eggplant. He ate each bite as if tasting it for the very first time. Every flavor carried love and forgiveness. His mother watched him, her smile breaking through tears. After the meal, he placed the letter on the family altar. A stick of incense burned, its smoke curling upward, wrapping around the paper as if lifting it like a freed spirit. He bowed and whispered, "I'm home." The story closed with a simple picture, the mother sitting on the porch, her gaze no longer lost in an empty lane but lit with peace. The son sat beside her, hand in hand. The sunset draped everything in gold, crickets sang in chorus, and the wind from the fields blew cool across their faces. Don't let your apology come too late. Don't let distance turn into forever. Some calls, if not made today, could become the regret of a lifetime. How long has it been since you said, "Mom, I miss you"? Will you dare to pick up the phone today before it's too late? Share this story to remind someone who might still be hesitating. Leave a comment below with the words you want to say to your mom. And don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss more stories that truly touch the heart.